By the mid-19th century, London was a city defined by severe physical contrast. Exploding industrial wealth shared the same streets with crushing poverty. Karl Marx arrived in this environment in August 1849, a political refugee escaping persecution across Europe. He would spend the rest of his life observing the British economy from the inside. He lived in extreme financial distress. While drafting his major economic critiques, Marx and his family occupied cramped, unsanitary rooms in Soho, heavily burdened by chronic debt and the loss of multiple children to disease. Alongside his primary collaborator Friedrich Engels, Marx documented the specific daily realities of the industrial working class. They built their economic theories directly from diagnosing the visceral, mechanical engine of early capitalism operating right outside their door. The urban working class lived in concentrated squalor. Families were packed into poorly ventilated slum alleys, completely lacking basic sanitation or clean water. In the mining sector, the extraction of coal relied heavily on child labor. Children under 10 were sent underground to navigate narrow, highly dangerous shafts. This diagram illustrates the reality of the working day. Adults and children alike regularly worked continuous 14 to 15-hour shifts, leaving almost no remaining time for sleep, education, or sustenance. Mine owners explicitly refused to alternate shifts, strictly to minimize expenses. Government attempts to regulate these conditions routinely failed. Legislation proved completely ineffective because Parliament intentionally understaffed the inspection offices, rendering the laws unenforceable. This extreme human suffering occurred concurrently with the single largest explosion of European industrial wealth in recorded history. Marx diagnosed this correlation as a structural guarantee. The capitalist system was functioning exactly as designed, mathematically requiring extreme poverty to generate extreme wealth. To explain how this design worked, Marx developed the concept of historical materialism. Historical materialism is the theory that the physical, economic conditions of a society dictate the course of human history, rather than abstract ideas or morality. He divided society into two main components, starting with the economic base. The base consists of the physical means of production, the factories, materials, and land, along with the specific social relationships required to operate them. Everything else in society sits on top of this foundation, forming the superstructure. The superstructure includes the legal system, the political institutions, religion, and cultural ideologies. The relationship between the two is strictly directional. The economic base determines the character, the limits, and the function of the superstructure above it. Over time, technological advancements cause the productive forces to outgrow the existing social relations. When the base inevitably fractures under this pressure, it forces a revolution in the superstructure. Therefore, under capitalism, the laws, courts, and culture making up the superstructure are entirely engineered to protect the property and maintain the power of whoever controls the economic base. Within the capitalist base, Marx identified two inherently antagonistic classes: the bourgeoisie, a small class that owns the means of production, and the massive proletariat, the working class. The proletariat owns no property or capital. To survive, they have no option but to sell their physical capacity to labor to the bourgeoisie in exchange for a wage. This transaction creates surplus value. Surplus value is the new additional wealth generated by the workers' labor that strictly exceeds the cost of their daily wages. The bourgeoisie automatically siphons off this excess as profit. This extraction process is the mandatory engine of capitalism. Without extracting surplus value, the capitalist cannot generate profit and will go out of business. Class conflict is therefore a structural requirement. The owner must extract as much labor for as little cost as possible, while the worker must fight to retain enough value to survive. The daily brutality of this extraction remains largely invisible to the public due to a phenomenon Marx called commodity fetishism. Commodity fetishism is the psychological process where the social relationships of production are masked by the physical goods themselves. In a developed market, society only interacts with the final product and its price tag. The consumer remains entirely disconnected from the origin of the item. The 14-hour shifts, the physical danger, and the exploitation of child labor are erased, replaced entirely by a clean transactional relationship between buyer and object. This illusion makes the capitalist mode of production feel entirely natural. The market appears to be governed by objective laws of physics rather than by human constructs designed to exploit labor. Commodity fetishism acts as the ultimate camouflage, blinding society to the immense human cost required to fill its store windows. Zooming out, Marx analyzed how the system behaves over time through the cycle of capital accumulation. Capital accumulation is the continuous reinvestment of profit back into the economy to generate even more capital. Driven by relentless market competition, capitalists cannot simply keep their profits. They must constantly reinvest their extracted surplus value into newer, more efficient machinery to outpace their rivals. As this graph models, this creates a fatal paradox. Because human labor is the only actual source of surplus value, replacing workers with machines causes the overall rate of profit to fall over time. As profit margins shrink, smaller capitalists go bankrupt, and their assets are swallowed by larger competitors. Wealth aggressively consolidates into fewer and fewer hands. Simultaneously, the system produces more goods than the increasingly impoverished proletariat can actually afford to purchase, resulting in periodic crises of overproduction. Marx concluded that capitalism is inherently unstable. It is a system that mathematically engineers its own cyclical breakdowns and guarantees its eventual collapse. This brings us back to the stark reality of the 19th century London working class. The squalor of Soho was the physical manifestation of these exact economic mechanics. The parliamentary reforms of the era consistently failed because they attempted to alter the superstructure without changing the capitalist base. Marx proved that systemic exploitation cannot be legislated away while the underlying economic engine requires it. While his predictions of an inevitable global workers' revolution remain fiercely debated, his diagnosis of capitalism's structural flaws, its tendency toward monopoly, crisis, and inequality, remains highly influential today. In the study of political economy, the Marxist framework stands as the definitive countermodel to classical liberal economics. It forces us to evaluate modern wealth through a structural lens. We must ask whether poverty, extreme inequality, and cyclical market crashes are isolated failures of capitalism or the exact symptoms of the system working perfectly.